Let me start the next session. We're talking about why culture is important. There's no doubt in all our minds why culture is important. We've seen it happening. We've seen the outcome of not so good culture, or what we call bad culture. But what is culture? That's the next question that we'll be asking ourselves as we share this section here. And so why there's no doubt that culture is important. We've all seen it, bad culture at Uber, bad culture at Volkswagen, bad culture at Nissan. All these have happened in the past, and we will not see the last of them. There will continue to be organizations, situations where culture matters, when things go wrong. And you probably talk to me and say, or say to me, Wanchan, we all seen this before. Yes, we have, but how do we face the challenge of preventing something like this from happening again? Another example of bad culture, you heard of it, Wells Fargo. Can you imagine where thousands of people would do an illegal creation of fictitious accounts just to stay in the job? And we found this quote by a former employee of Wells Fargo, and he was in the 1991 Gulf War. And for him to say that he had less stress being dispatched to the Gulf War than working for Wells Fargo, makes you wonder, why do bad cultures persist in organizations like Wells Fargo, Uber, and all these organizations that we've seen happen again and again and again. Culture is important to all stakeholders. Like we mentioned, there are 5 stakeholder groups, starting with customers, employees, as you see here, a survey by Glassdoor that ranked culture and values as a key factor that most employees crave for in organizations. Maybe we take a quick pause here and for you to take note, how many of you have gone to Glassdoor and see how you're ranked in terms of culture for your own organization? I was very surprised. I gave a face-to-face workshop not too long ago, probably my last one for a long time. And I asked the room, when was the last time you used look at Glassdoor for your organization? And some of them actually asked me, Wanchan, what is Glassdoor? And I was shocked. Now, how can you not know what is Glassdoor in today's environment? So put that into your to-do list. Take a look at Glassdoor and how organizations, how employees, both current, former, and potential employees, rank your organization in terms of your culture. It's a valuable indicator, and we should talk about how do you measure and evaluate your culture. Well, Glassdoor is one good example of measuring and evaluating your culture. So, importance of culture to employees as a key stakeholder group. And culture is important, but the challenge is that culture is different for everybody. If you look at these 4 examples, Netflix, what gives us the best chance of continuous success for many generations of technology and people? That's their culture. For LinkedIn, culture is what sets us apart, who defines who we are and shapes what we aspire to be. And for Grab, which is a hailing cab organization, similar to Uber, their culture is that they continue to question everyday's limitations and they still remain incredibly optimistic. And finally, we know where this city is, the city that never sleeps, the Big Apple, New York City, who's in the news all this time right now. So everybody knows that culture is important. We know that culture has gone wrong in many organizations, and we know that culture is defined very differently for different organizations. But yet, the big question that we all need to ask is that, what is culture. But before that, a couple of examples I want to share with you before we talk about what is culture in today's situation of the coronavirus, postponing the Summer Olympics. Can you imagine making such a major decision in such a difficult time? You have a culture of hierarchy that is making decision making very difficult. That there need to be a shift in this article to shift from a culture of hierarchy to a culture of inclusion. But you know that culture is very difficult to change overnight. Culture takes forever to build. They always say that even though everybody quits and the organization shuts down, culture still remains as it's like a smell. It remains there even though after people have gone for a long time. By the way, the link to all these articles are at the bottom of the slides. So when we send you the slides next week, you'll be able to get to the link for each of these articles on each of these pages. So can you imagine for the International Olympic Committee to be able to make a decision to change or to postpone the Summer Olympics from this year to next year? They took almost forever. Everybody was holding their breath to change from a culture of hierarchy to a culture of inclusion. So can you imagine for day-to-day organizations, it is not easy to change culture overnight. So we are waiting for something critical to happen. We can't wait for culture to change. And thereby culture is important. The next slide is a sad case. I didn't even know that in South Korea that calling in sick or taking sick leave is frowned upon, because when you take leave, you don't spend long hours at work, and long hours in South Korea, and I guess in many countries, probably including Singapore, where good work equals long hours. And there's this fear amongst colleagues and workers that taking the day off because you're sick would inconvenience colleagues and giving the bosses a bad impression on them. But can you imagine in normal times, people will smile at this kind of culture, but in today's time, culture can be deadly. So culture is important, culture is critical, culture can be deadly, can be challenging. Culture is very differently defined by different people. And that then comes to that question that I've been asking all this while. What then is culture? Is culture so important? What is this thing called culture? But before that, let me share with you a couple of slides as to why culture continues to be even more and more important. I'll share with you regulation and culture. Yes, there are regulations on culture, especially in 4 countries, in Singapore, Malaysia, the UK, and the US. And these are very specific culture where the regulators are enforcing the tone at the top to put more emphasis on culture. And with these regulations, it makes the definition of culture a bit more clear, there's a bit more clarity, but once again, it's a very difficult question as to what is culture. So coming back to regulation, the Malaysian flag that you see on the left-hand side, Section 17A, which is effective 1st June of 2020 this year, the MACC, or the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Committee, is actually is a section in the Act that says that you must have a culture of integrity. So, but what is a culture of integrity? And in the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, it says that corporate culture must be strengthened with emphasis on accountability and transparency. These are 2 values. So our culture about values, so integrity, accountability, transparency, these are all values, something that you believe in. And for culture to work, you must have values. But is that all there is to it? Does values equal to culture? Is that what culture is all about? And if you look at the regulation and the Singapore flag on the right-hand side, the 2018 Singapore Code of Corporate Governance, it is embedded in the code that says that the role of the board must include establishing an appropriate culture. When you see the word values, once again, ethical standards, which are similar to values, ethical standards of conduct at all levels of the company. So from the board down all the way down to the most junior worker, there must be an appropriate culture. But what is an appropriate culture? What is values, once again? So we see all these keywords trying to describe culture, but yet we can't see it. It's a bit like the black hole. We know in science there's this thing called the black hole. We can't see the black hole, but the theory proves that there is a black hole. So is culture a bit like that, like the black hole? We know it's there, we can feel it, we believe in it, we know it can cause harm, we know it can cause damage, but yet we can't see it. It's very difficult to describe it in the common terms that all of us can believe in one common definition of culture. The second step of regulation in the UK, in the 2018 Code of Corporate Governance, it first emphasizes that there's the importance of a clear purpose and strategy linked to corporate culture. So here you see another buzzword, purpose. What is purpose? And for today's webinar session, purpose is what is your why? Why do you do what you do? And in the old days, companies would say, well, we do what we do in order to make profits for our shareholders. But that's in the old days where shareholder was the only stakeholder they have to face. But in today's environment, there are many more stakeholders, your customers, your employees, your suppliers, the community that you work in. So here there are 5 big groups of stakeholders that you need to serve, and you do what you do. So why you do what you do is because you need to serve these stakeholders. So it's not just making profits, not just delivering dividends, but other things that matter to these various stakeholders. So in the UK code, they are mandated, is required to report on your corporate culture and how that's linked to your purpose in the organization. So based on what I've seen in the marketplace, the UK code is probably the most sophisticated when it comes to corporate culture reporting. And finally, the US Securities Exchange Commission, they're introducing new disclosure rules on disclosing human capital resources. So things like people management. They don't specifically mention culture, but it's implied in there that when you talk about human capital, you would have to talk about culture or corporate culture. So regulations are catching up. There are going to be more and more of this regulation on corporate culture, forcing companies to disclose. But you shouldn't be just forcing companies to disclose, because it's so important. And we've seen that corporate culture is important. It can be fatal. It's critical. You don't need regulations to prove the point that it's something that you need to communicate to your stakeholders, that it's something that you place a lot of importance on it. So we talk about importance of culture. We all know that it's critical, it's deadly. The regulators are there, they're watching us. But the big questions that we talked about that begs to be answered is, what is corporate culture? Is there a single definition of corporate culture? We've seen Netflix, we've seen Grab, we've seen LinkedIn, we see New York City, all having different definitions. And my position on this is that it's going to be very difficult to have one single definition of corporate culture. In fact, Black Sun, we've tried to answer that question, and we answered that question with another question. So if you were to ask me what is culture, my answer would be, well, culture is, if you're able to answer what are the shared values, the shared attitudes, the shared behavior, the shared standards, the shared beliefs that characterize your organization and defines its nature, then you have the answer to culture. So you have a question to a question, you know that it's going to be very difficult to find the answer. So then what is culture if it's so difficult to define? And just like the black hole, you can't see the black hole, but there are enough theoretical proofs around how the black hole can be seen, so-called seen. So there you have it. You can't see a black hole, but we all know that it's there. So in this session, how do you so-called see culture? Because if you can't see it, it's very difficult to deal with it. And we believe that there are 4 indicators as to how you can see culture. You can see culture, you can then manage it, you can deal with it before it goes into a terrible state, or what we call a bad culture, or inappropriate culture, unhealthy culture, whatever you call it, negative culture. Before it goes bad, you need to see culture in order to manage culture. So we believe that in order to see culture, there are 4 indicators of culture, 4 ways that you can see culture. One is really culture commitment. What's the commitment of the organization? How do you see commitment in terms of with respect to culture? How do organizations implement culture? How do they measure and evaluate culture? And finally, how do they communicate culture? So these are the indicators that we believe will help organizations so-called see culture. And once again, the better that you're able to see culture, the better you're able to manage culture, and the better it is for the organization to thrive in the long term and create value for its stakeholders. So there you have it, the 4 indicators that culture can be seen through how organizations commit to their culture, how organizations implement their culture, how organizations measure and evaluate culture, and how they communicate culture. Just a quick one, what's the difference between measurement and evaluation? So for example, to measure something, you need a form of measure, whether you use a ruler or a weighing scale, that's a measure. When you say somebody is overweight or underweight, you can use a benchmark. So we say somebody who is 1.7 meter tall should have a weight of 70 kg. That's your benchmark. And then when you evaluate, you step on the scale and you weigh 80 kg, then you're overweight. So that's how you measure and evaluate. So we'll talk about some of the measurement and so how culture is measured and how it's evaluated. So we believe that these are the 4 ways in which culture can be seen. And once it's seen, culture is then managed. So the challenge is for dear participants is how do you find out in your organization these 4 elements. If you can put them together, then you're able to manage culture in your own respective organizations. Maybe what we can do is take a couple of minutes pause here. If there are any questions as to what we covered so far before we dive into what is commitment, what is implementation, what is measurement, what is evaluation, and what is communication with regards to corporate culture. First section of the 4 sections on how do you see culture, what is culture commitment? And this is really what some people call tone at the top. Culture commitment is tone at the top, where it sets the tone for the company's desired culture. So what culture do you want? And as a result of that, what are the values and behaviors that you need to have a desired culture? So this is a somewhat innocuous statement where you say commitment is what you want for a desired culture. So simple. I want a good culture. I commit to having a desired culture, but it's not so simple as that, because culture is comprises of values, beliefs, behaviors, and purpose, as we will soon see in a while. So you can't just say, I want a desired, I want to have a great culture. A lot of CEOs out there we've seen, they say, we want to have a great culture. We want to have a fabulous culture. Want to have a good culture, but they don't understand that it's like an iceberg. You can see the tip of the iceberg, and that is what we call a desired culture. But it is the below the surface that you need to take note of that drives what is a desired culture. And below the ocean level, when you see the bottom part of the iceberg, is what we call the values and the beliefs of the organizations. So commitment, a lot of people stop here when they say, what culture do you want? They say, I want a good culture, but it shouldn't stop there. So as you speak to your leadership, your board, your CEOs in your organization, and they talk about what they want as a culture, and they say, I want to have a great culture, you should stop them there and say, look, it's easy to say I want to have a good culture, but it shouldn't stop there. So this slide here is only the beginning of that commitment. Now, if all the slides that you have that we will be presenting, about 45 slides, this is probably the most important slide that I want to share with you. Culture is an outcome. If you look at the right-hand side, for those who are right-handed, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen here, culture is an outcome. It is something that you arrive at after you started on a journey. And the start of the journey is purpose. So purpose, it always is the starting point. Purpose is what is your why. Why do you do what you do? Like I mentioned earlier on in the past, companies exist because they serve shareholders. So we exist to make revenue, profits, dividends for shareholders. But your purpose will change. There's a imagination of purpose, because the stakeholder groups has evolved to more than just the shareholders. If you look at it, there's the customers, there's employees, there's the suppliers, and of course there's the community. And lastly, but not least, is the investor or the shareholder. So what is your why? Why do you do what you do? And these 5 stakeholder groups will influence what values that you want to drive to how you serve these stakeholder groups. So the second circle in the center is your values. My colleague Zirwei described values as bullet points to your culture. But bullet points, you need points. You need to articulate for each bullet point what it's all about. So bullet points, values, which in turn shapes your culture. But this diagram, like I say, is, you know this is an important diagram. There are other matters that will influence how this diagram shapes out. But suffice to say that the starting point for culture is not just, I want to have a great culture, I want to have a good culture. The starting point for culture is commitment from the tone at the top that purpose is what drives culture. And once again, culture is an outcome. It is not an end in itself. And the center part of culture, the glue or the bullet point to culture is values or our values. So things like accountability, innovation, trust, integrity, teamwork. A lot of people talk about these values, but they put it on the wall. I mean, have you seen the values in your organization? For the matter of fact, can each one of you name all the values that's in your organization? Some of you can remember, some can remember by the acronyms. Some people remember it's a poster on the wall. And a lot of values are like that. They are posters on the wall. What you need to do is to take the values off the wall and implement it. But how do you implement culture, which we share with you in the second part of this presentation. So coming back to this diagram again, we look at purpose. What is your why? And that is really the tone at the top, and not just about the CEO saying that I want to have a great culture. And what is your why? We put it into 5 stakeholder groups. In last August, there was this report by the Business Roundtable in the US, which is a grouping of almost 200 CEOs of the biggest listed companies in the US. And they issued a white paper that talks about the reimagination of purpose within the organizations. And when they say they reimagine, it says that they've gone beyond the shareholder as the only stakeholder in the the reliance of organizations on who they should be responsible to. And this is in theory. Well, I'm a professor, so I gotta talk about theory. In theory, it's talk about the primacy of the shareholder. Primacy meaning that the only person that you're accountable to is the shareholder or the investor. But that can't be further from the truth today, where you don't just generate long-term value for your shareholder, but you need to support the community that you work in. You need to deal fairly and ethically with your suppliers. You need to invest in your employees, and you need to deliver value to your customers. So each of these points, these 5 groups of stakeholders, determines your purpose. What is your why? What do you do what you do? Well, because you want to deliver value. Why do you do what you do? Because you want to invest in your employees. Why do you do what you do? Because you want to deal fairly and ethically with your suppliers. Why? Because you want to serve your community. Why? Because you want to get dividends and profits and increase in shareholder value for your shareholders. So there are many whys for the organization. And for each of these whys, you need to think about their values. So if we look at the previous slide, oops. The purpose is here. If I use my mouse here, running over, what is your why? And it links to your 5 stakeholder groups. For each stakeholder group, you talk about what are the values. For example, for the stakeholder group of customers, what are the values that you want to deal with or have for your customers? I can think of honesty. You sell a product that's fit for purpose. So honesty is a great value to deal with a stakeholder group called customers, and so on and so forth for each of the customer group. When you add up all these values, it turns into behavior, and behavior finally result in an outcome called culture. So once again, culture is an outcome, not something that you want, but something that you, as a result of what you do, you get culture. We talk about these 5 stakeholder groups. Now, these 5 stakeholder groups will be emphasized upon in the 14th of May. In our second webinar, we talk about stakeholder engagement. For this session today, we don't talk about how you engage with these 5 stakeholder groups, but each of these stakeholder groups need to engage with not just on a yearly basis, but quarterly, monthly, daily, hourly, every second of the day. They need tender, loving care. So as to how you engage with these stakeholders, once again, 14th of May, we're also doing a lot of research. We're going to look at the top companies in KL, top 30 companies in Singapore. We're going to look at their annual reports. We're going to look at all their websites. So there'll be hundreds of data points that we're looking at as to how companies engage with the stakeholders. So mark your calendars for the 14th of May we'll be sharing with you, we'll be teaching you how you engage with these stakeholders groups. in order to create value for them, serve the purpose for them, and also as you do it, you create culture for your organization. So once again, it's all intertwined. And we talk about values. So honesty, integrity, accountability. Who doesn't want all these values? They sound great, but most of these values are values on the wall. What you need to do as a culture commitment, to see culture is to get it off the wall, get it off the poster, get it off. So you see an acronym like this, CLEAR. Everybody can remember CLEAR. Everybody can remember the acronym, but CLEAR stands for, you need an acronym to remember. There's client focus, leadership, excellence, aspiration, results oriented. But after a while, people remember the acronym, and you can see all this acronym all the place, like I care, this and that, all these acronyms and nice colorful posters, paintings on the walls. But real culture is about getting it off the wall and into the streets, or literally how your organization behave with regards to culture. So get it off your wall. And before we go into the second section as to how you see culture, which is implementation, at the commitment section, the first one as to how you see culture is really turning values into action. So we talk about the iceberg. So below the iceberg are your values, what you believe in. The values I believe in are beliefs. And these are all internal to the organization. But what you need to do is to externalize all these values, or take it off the wall and make it into an action movie. So actions and attitudes are external to the organization, and it is really taking all these bullet points. So like we said, values are bullet points. How do you take these bullet points and transform them to actions that are external to the organization? And that is then you're truly on the way from purpose to values to actions, attitude, and finally, the outcome once again is culture, or corporate culture. So it's not easy as saying that I want to have a great culture and you stop there. That's not commitment. That's not tone at the top. That's only hearsay. Oh, I heard the CEO say that he wants a great culture. That's what we call hearsay. So you need to go beyond hearsay to we say that everybody is involved in defining what is culture through this commitment, through this tone at the top. The second part after culture commitment is culture implementation. So how do you make it work? How does rubber hit the road when it comes to corporate culture? How do you get your values off the wall into the streets? Interesting cartoon here, but if you read the cartoon, you find that you see something similar in your organization. We have a great culture because we have a social committee. And here in this cartoon, it says that we have a happiness committee. So how many of you have seen it within your organization? We have a culture committee, we have this movement, we have this, we have that, we have this initiative, but initiatives are only as good as activities. And if nobody organizes activities, it stops dead there. And that's not culture, that's only a, something that is momentary, something that you hope for that will spark into something exciting, but it doesn't, because it is something that is not implementable. So you talk about how do you implement culture, you talk about policies and mechanisms and processes. It must be embedded throughout the organization. It's not something that's a committee that meets once a quarter. So this is something that is unique to every organization. And the guidance from me to you is really to think about how these policies, mechanisms, and processes can be implemented throughout the organization. And this is where culture needs to be owned by everyone within the organization. And there should be no disconnect between management and how employees view culture. I know it's difficult to think about implementation, but it is not impossible to think about how you implement culture within the organization. The third area that I wanted to cover is how do you measure and evaluate culture? And in doing so, you achieve what we call, how do you see culture? So we talk about commitment at the top, we talk about implementation, and now if a culture is being able to be measured and evaluated, all the better you're able to see it. And we all know that whole saying that what is measured can be managed. So same thing with culture. Culture can be measured, can be evaluated. It's really finding the right measurement in order to determine whether it's the right measurement of culture. And what are these examples of how you measure culture? I got another interesting cartoon here about the measurement of good culture. So if I show you a picture of bears who are people who are being attacked by bears, you know that how good you feel because you're not in that situation. So that's a measurement of culture, but it's just a joke. Of course, we know that. But setting clear indicators or clear measures of culture and setting targets as to how you want to measure cultures, again, all this, how you want to evaluate against all these measures or indicators will set you in the right direction with regards to being able to see culture. And there you have it. Once again, it's a 5 stakeholder groups that I've brought up here so that there's a linkage to stakeholders. And for each of these stakeholder groups, I've identified an easy measure or indicator as to how you want to measure culture with each of these stakeholder groups. So let's take employees. A lot of organizations do stakeholder engagement with employees, how engaged you are with stakeholders. But a lot of organizations don't determine what should be the score. So they come up with a stakeholder engagement or employee engagement exercise, but they don't think about what should be the score be. So the score is what we call the evaluation or the benchmark. And the engagement survey is called the measure. So as you measure the engagement with employees and you have a score and you group it together, that will give you an indication of how well you're doing with regards to a culture for the stakeholder group, which in this case are employees. So same thing with customers, you do a satisfaction survey. So that will determine how engaged you are with your customers. For the community, it's on CSR efforts. And for suppliers, how do they comply with your code of conduct when it comes to suppliers? And for shareholders, we talk about investor relations. Now, investor relations is something that many of us are familiar with. And the measurement that you put within investor relations are how frequent do you hold meetings? How frequent do you engage with your shareholders? And you say once a quarter, that is your benchmark. And if you meet that benchmark, you are well evaluated, for example. But if you put all these 5 groups of stakeholders together, you're going to have multiple types of measurement, multiple types of evaluation, multiple types of benchmarks. And it's not something simple. You need to sit down very carefully and say, how do you want to measure? How do you want to evaluate each of these stakeholder groups so that in cumulative purpose point of view, you're able to distill them to this thing called culture. So when you measure, when you evaluate, the outcome of that is culture. When you commit, when you talk about purpose, when you talk about values, the outcome of that is culture. When you implement your processes, your policies, your procedures, when you involve everybody in all these items, the outcome is culture. So there you see whether it's commitment, whether it's implementation, or in this third section, whether it's measurement or evaluation, the outcome is always corporate culture. And once again, it's very difficult to see unless you get to that point in time. So my counsel to you at this point in time is to be brave and not to be impatient by saying that, oh, I can't see culture. It's so difficult to see it. It takes time, just like a black hole. It takes time, years and years and years of prodding and thinking about the theory of black holes. Then you can finally say that, yes, I see culture. I see the black hole. So culture is a bit like that. It takes persistence, it takes time, but you must remember the reward is that once good culture is entrenched within the organization, it stays there for a long, long, long time. And unfortunately, if there's a bad culture, it also stays there for a long time. Even though when people quit, the organization moves on, people move on, the culture, the bad culture is still be there. So it's worthwhile the investment in terms of commitment, in terms of implementation, in terms of measurement and evaluation is worth the effort, because culture, when it's well entrenched, it will last you a long time, and the benefits, and we talk about long-term value creation. Remember, one of the 8 components of trust, long-term value creation. So culture leads to long-term value creation, culture leads to engagement with stakeholders, culture leads to risk management. Because you don't engage with your stakeholders, you won't be able to manage your risk, or in technical term, we call it material matters, what matters to these stakeholders. So all the 8 components of trust are all intertwined, and citing today is corporate culture, but it's difficult. I must say to you, it's difficult. but it's an ongoing effort. So don't be disheartened. And finally, the last section, after commitment, after implementation, after measurement and evaluation, we have what we call communication. How do you tell your story? How do you tell it in such a way that people believe in you? And we'll share with you a couple of best practices in terms of how do you communicate your corporate culture with your stakeholders. And you must remember, for each of these stakeholders, the communication is very, very different. It's very differently nuanced, very differently positioned. And what to share with you is really Black Sun. We've done a deep research on corporate culture last year. We did it for Malaysia and Singapore, the top 30 companies in both exchanges. There's a QR code there. You can snap it if you want right now, and you link to the research piece, and you see on the back of my makeshift studio here at the Working Capital. I'm sure the Working Capital will invest in a better studio after this successful webinar. Right, Ben? I think you will say yes. So take a read of this. These two research reports. One is the blue color one, and one is the beige color one. But very detailed analysis as to how culture communication or how culture should be reported to your stakeholders. And to complement this research, by 14th of May, we're going to do a research on stakeholder engagement. So we report on your culture, but how do you engage with your stakeholders, which is the second part of this research that we are doing right now. And we are doing it in a very big fashion. We're looking at top 30 companies in Singapore, top 30 companies in Malaysia, both their annual reports and their websites. And hopefully this can complete the two-part series of culture reporting and stakeholder engagement. And with that, we're able to see some perspective that will be interesting on the 14th of May as we share with you in that webinar. So take a look at the research. It's pretty detailed. But once again, we come back to the iceberg diagram. We talk about purpose leading to values and beliefs, which is beneath the surface of the iceberg. And if they have the right values and you take the values off the wall, it's not just acronyms, the values will turn into, and beliefs will turn into the right actions and the right attitude. And once you have the right action, the right attitude, hopefully that will transform slowly into the right corporate culture for the organization. Then it's time for you to shout about it. And it's not just shouting at random, but shouting with the voice, with a story that's commensurate with each of the 5 stakeholder groups. So various customers, employees, suppliers, your community that you work in, your shareholders, your investors. Each one of these communication must be nuanced. And the platform, whether it's through an annual report, through a website, through a newsletter, through EDM, each one of these are platforms, but platforms are not as important as knowing what the stakeholder group are and knowing what the story that we're going to tell. And remember, the story begins with purpose and ends with the stakeholder groups and creating value for them. So communication is not just about saying that we've got great value through our corporate culture, but how do you create that value on a long-term basis for each of these stakeholder groups? So what do stakeholders want to hear about corporate culture within organizations? What we've done is that we've curated 5 good examples as to how organizations engage with their different stakeholder groups. So these are through various platforms, could be through website or annual reports or special reports. And the first one that you see here is DBS Bank Annual Report 2019. And this communication on corporate culture is to their customers. And what we've done is that we are putting ourselves in the customer's shoes and say, how are you engaging with me as a customer? And the answer can be found in the DBS Annual Report 2019 that says that we interact with your customers to better understand their requirements so that we can propose the right financial solutions for them. We want to be the voice of customers. Some of you may say, but Wanshan, these are just words. True, they are just words. But words lead to action, and action leads to belief, and belief leads to long-term value creation for the stakeholders. So of course, the customers, when they read this, they will hold your feet to the fire and say, okay, you say this, but show me how you do it. So communication is once again linked back to commitment. So it goes in a full circle. We have commit, implement, measure, evaluate, communicate, and communicate this to commitment. So it's a circular kind of thing. You can't just say something in words without committing to it. So good example here, take a read through this, the DBS Annual Report 2019, and this specifically for the stakeholder group of customers. The second example is from Netflix on their website. I kind of like this one of all the 5 examples. This is from the stakeholder group perspective of employees, when employees are asking, how can I be successful in Netflix? And here I like it because Netflix say that many companies have value statements, or what we call values on the wall. But often Netflix say that these written values are vague and ignored, which is true. I can remember the acronym, but I can't remember the values. So below the values, Netflix want to say that the specific behaviors and skills. So this is something new that they brought up, skills. So not just behavior, not just action, but specific skills, competency that we care most about. And the more these values are sound like you and describe the people that you want to work with, then the more likely that you will thrive in Netflix. So this is really, really, really good communication piece. But of course, once again, how do then Netflix commit to this communication? Goes full circle. But like I say, of all the 5 examples, I like this the best one because it sounds truthful, sounds authentic, and that's storytelling in terms of communication. Need to be authentic and need to address the right stakeholder group. The third example that we have here is on suppliers. This from DBS Sustainable Sourcing Principles. So all suppliers might meet our minimum principles and standards of behavior in 4 key areas. And all our suppliers are reviewed at regular intervals to ensure compliance with our requirements. So this engenders transparency. Suppliers believe that they're being dealt with fairly and ethically. Remember, the purpose of the stakeholder group of suppliers and why you do what you do with suppliers is really to do ethically and fairly with suppliers. So this is really all about the story of transparency. So do you have a culture of transparency, the outcome as a result of embracing the right values? So another good example for the stakeholder group here. The 4th area is the community. So we have taken the Malaysian example, Sam Darby Group, Berhad 2019 annual report. That's last June. So here they talk about how they give back to the community. They're committed to contributing to a better society, doing better for the communities. They do both monetary and non-monetary through the Yayasan Sam Darby, or what we call Sam Darby Foundation, through the various initiatives. And many of you have seen CSR sections in annual reports or websites. They do good, feel good feeling that they paint a house, they do a walkathon, they donate bags of rice. But it's going to be more than that. You've got to see the community as a stakeholder group and how do you create long-term value for these stakeholder groups. And then that gives you the outcome of a culture that the community see. So the community sees, for example, Sam Darby has a great culture because of what they do for the community. That's an outcome of all these efforts here. So a great example from Sam Darby addressing the community stakeholder group. And finally, for shareholders or for investors, a lot of questions that shareholders want to ask, but some have not been well answered, is really, what mistakes have you made? Because if shareholders can see mistakes made, they will know that the company will learn from it and do better. And I will invest in a company that wants to do better. Why not? Rather than companies who just stagnate in good times or bad times. So here, there were some service level issues in SingPost in the last couple of years, 2018, 2019. So they have said, yes, we have done something not appropriate. We are doing a review of our entire postal system and we'll raise our quality. Sounds great, great communication. Tells you that they have a great culture because they are not averse to admitting mistakes and doing something about it. Of course, you say that the proof of is in the taste of the pudding, and SingPost have done well. They've done a lot to raise the service level standard. So it goes back to commitment. You read their LinkedIn page by the Postmaster General, look at the website. Sure, things still are not 100%, but they've done a lot of good things. So if you look at it in terms of the diagram, the 4 areas that we talk about just past is commitment, implementation, measurement and evaluation, and communication with regards to corporate culture. And this underpins the starting point of corporate culture, which is not culture in itself. So culture doesn't start with a phrase saying that I've got a great culture, or what we call hearsay. it starts with purpose. What is your why? And purpose is linked to each of the stakeholder groups, starting with your customers, your employees, suppliers, the community, and finally your investors or your shareholders. What is your why? This is something that very difficult in our research when it comes to corporate culture. If you look at this, the research that you see here, that if you link it to your QR code, how many companies talk about their purpose in their annual reports or websites? Very few, unfortunately, because it's very difficult to articulate your purpose, and thereby culture is very difficult to build. So the starting point is challenging, and a lot of people go the easy route and just say, I got a great culture, I got a good culture. So don't take the easy route, even though it's a no-brainer, but choose the tougher route because it's the right route. Start with the purpose, and with purpose, yes, what's your why for each of the stakeholder groups, and that influences the selection of your values. Values are what you believe in collectively as a group within the organization, and for each of the stakeholder group. And at the same time, make sure that your values are not values on the wall, but your values are items that are something that you believe in. You've got to take it off the wall. And finally, if you believe in your values, which is the things beneath the surface of the iceberg, and in terms, it translates into action, it translates into attitudes, the right attitudes, hopefully it's no guarantee there. Hopefully then that becomes your corporate culture. And with that, there you have it, the importance of corporate culture in today's challenging times, because it's all about the long-term play. And with that, I'll be happy to take questions from participants. Thanks for staying and going to almost your dinner time. And some of you in London will be close to lunchtime. So if I can summarize why stakeholder engagement is important, because it is linked, why corporate culture is important, because it is one of the key components, not necessarily the starting component, but absolutely a key component of trust. And to drive corporate culture, you need to think about purpose through your stakeholders, which is then you need to engage with them, which is the next area that I've circled there. And all the other components of trust in there, which are very important to drive long-term value creation for the organization. And the last slide I have here is really to mark your calendar. You can send an email to Wenshu and take a snap of this screen here. We'll send you the slides by next week once we put in the recording. How to do stakeholder engagement in turbulent times, or in good times, in bad time, in any time. Stakeholder engagement is not just once in a while, once a year, you send a survey out to your stakeholder, send a survey to your employee or to your supplier or to your investors and say, hello, how are you? Please tick yes or no kind of thing. It's continuous. And in fact, one of the biggest challenge for stakeholder engagement is that who should be responsible for stakeholder engagement? And that's really $1 million question. And everybody says everybody. Same thing with corporate culture. Who should be responsible for corporate culture? Everybody. And we all know that when everybody is responsible, nobody is responsible. So difficult questions and not easy to find answers to. So we got a question from Zuhing. Why is there a need to communicate culture? Why would stakeholders and shareholders need to know? Why is there a need to communicate culture? Well, it's simple, Zuhing. The need to communicate culture because culture is linked to trust, and you want people to trust you. Nicolette question on corporate culture is a process. How much time should organizations give themselves before expecting to see the result of programs designed to improve their corporate culture? Well, Nicolette, the answer to you on that question is how much time should companies commit is ongoing. It will never end. So I wouldn't say commit a time. I would say commit. That's it. It's an ongoing thing. There's no time limit. It's not a project. Corporate culture is not a project. It's a process, like what you said. So there shouldn't be time-based, but it should be on an ongoing basis. Ben asked a question of how an organization approach employees how can an organization approach getting employees on board in adopting culture? So how do you get employees to adopt culture? And it's really part of engagement. So what you need to think about, what's the best way to engage your employees? Some companies think about town hall. Some companies think about newsletters. Some companies think about intranets to engage your employees. But in order to get employees on board with adopting your culture, I think you need to, first of all, get them on board on what's engage. How do you engage with them? Once a quarter town hall, it may work for some organizations, but may not work for your organization because people may be very cynical. You get a CEO standing on the soapbox saying that we are good, we are great. Go and get them. Our values are we care. It's another acronym. So if your employees don't believe in how you engage with them, they will never get on board with the culture. So I hope Ben that answers your question. So Ben was asking, how do you get your employees on board in adopting the culture? So it's not about adopting a culture. It's about getting your employees to believe that you engage with them. It's not just surface level. So, a lot of CEOs do walkabouts. They walk about the corridor. They say hello to the employees. Oh, hello, how are you? I've not seen you. You just joined. Yeah, I joined 20 years ago, right? So these are not authentic communication, not authentic engagement. So you need to think about how to engage employees. So we'll talk about how to engage with your stakeholders on the 14th of May. Vincent from IY have a question. In my view, the company secretary as a governance professional should take the challenge to drive good culture with the help of the C-suite, be a change maker and change agent in the organization. So Vincent is a corporate secretary at IOI, and I truly believe in him that the corporate secretary, who is a governance professional, should take the lead, if anything, in terms of driving good corporate culture together with the C-suites, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the CIO. Somebody must take the lead. And I think corporate secretaries are I think, recognized as being a change agent within the organization. So thanks for that comment, Vincent. What we'll do is that all these questions and answers are all recorded. So if I'm speaking too fast, you can't catch my accent, we will send the recording of all this so I can play down in slow speed. One question that I'll ask myself, we got one from Joel. How do you maintain trust in the current volatile environment where promises are made but are broken due to rapid deterioration in the market environment? Well, Joel, good question, but tough question, and I'll try to answer that. I think promises, unfortunately, occasionally broken. It's not unusual for promises to be broken, but trust is a long-term play. And this is where you need to think about value creation in the long term. So play the long term, and then I see you use the word current volatile. So it's current. We hope that this will go away in not too long time. Long term means really, really forever kind of thing. And culture is a forever kind of thing. And how do you create value in that long-term perspective? And how do you maintain that? That trust is really engagement once again. And don't wait for things to get worse when you say, hello, how are you? Can you give me some work? Can I talk to you? So when you promise something and that promise is broken for conditions that you cannot control, you can say sorry, but you still have the trust there, because trust is engendered by engagement. So Joel, my short answer to you is that maintain trust through engagement. And Joel asked, how do you survive long term? You don't break promises in the short term. Yeah, promises can be broken. You promise something, but due to accidental circumstances, things do go wrong. So that's not just about breaking promises, but things go wrong. You can't live up to expectations. You're not up to mark. Things do go wrong. Things will go wrong, and that is under the section of risk management. So I'm a professor in risk management, and I'll be covering the risk management component in I think June or July. So we'll be have a webinar on risk management, and risk management is part of creating trust. So when you tell your customers nothing can go wrong, that's silly. Things can and things do go wrong. But it's all about how you nuance it. And when things go wrong, you can say that it's due to this reason, but trust is forever. And all these 8 components of trust, when you build trust, it lasts a long, long time. So it's a long-term play. I hope that answers your question, Joel. Ben got a question on how do you make time to reinforce culture when you're firefighting? Absolutely good question, Ben. When you're fighting, how do you reinforce culture? And it is really, fire strengthens metal. It is through that fire that reinforces culture. So Ben, when you're firefighting, I would say you are actually building culture. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. It's great to firefight. It is where you see true personality, true values, whether you run away or you stick and fight for what you believe in. So do you have the right values, Ben? You have the right values and you're firefighting. Your employees, your suppliers, your members like myself, we will stand by and fight with you because we believe in you. But you need to engage your stakeholders when you fight fire so that they know that you're fighting fire. Otherwise, you get burned for nothing. So as you can see from my answers to these great questions, corporate culture is not about a short-term thinking. It's a long play. It's a really, really long-term play. If you ask me, Wanchan, the long-term everybody's dead. Oh, it's true. But if you don't think about long-term, you will never get to where you want to go in the short term. And long-term is about trust, long-term value creation. Couple more questions. Vincent got a question. Do you see corporate culture reporting a new reporting requirement in the near future in Malaysia and Singapore? Well, in the UK, Vincent, is already mandated. So you should try to look at all the UK annual reports during this reporting season because they're required to report on corporate culture. And the chairman of the board must sign off on corporate culture in the organization. So it's really all the way to the top that the chairman must assess, in the words of the code of the UK code, the chairman must assess and report on culture within the organization. Will it happen in Singapore, Malaysia? It's already required in the code, but it's not very clear for both Singapore and Malaysian code that culture reporting is required. And I would say those who do it this reporting season or soon will show commitment. So remember, commitment, implementation, measurement, evaluation, and communication. So being able to report it links back to commitment. So yes, I think that it's going to come. And I believe that you should not wait for it to be a requirement, but to be proactive in reporting culture. And there are many ways to see it, many ways to report. You don't have to do it through the annual report. It could be through your website, through EDM, through your newsletters, or through emails that the CEO send. I think all CEOs need some corporate culture coaching. If you read, probably watch too many movies, got this hero that says we've got a great culture, we've got a great team and give a great speech. But those are nice, those are Hollywood production. But you need something a bit more long-term, tangible. It's 7:40, so another 5 more minutes and then we'll take it to a close. But it's been a great presentation, or great participation from the attendees here. Good questions and hopefully good enough answers for you. Thanks for the support from London, from Malaysia, from Singapore, in attending our very first webinar. And thank you once again to another shout out to the Working Capital. Our prayers and go up to the people, for the folks in UK, and our prayers also go up to the folks in Malaysia. Everybody please be safe, please take care. We are all together in this and we all will get through this together. If there are no questions, then with that, on behalf of Black Sun, on behalf of the Working Capital, let me say a very grateful thank you for all you for taking time. I won't say away from work because most of you are working from home. Taking time for this webinar on the importance of corporate culture in today's turbulent times. I look forward to meeting all of you again on the 14th of May as we present stakeholder engagement, which is the second component of building trust amongst our stakeholders. And with that, good evening, Singapore, good evening, Malaysia, and have a good lunch, people from London. Thank you. And we'll send you the slides and the link to the audio recording by next week. Thank you. Bye.